Hey everybody, welcome back to Great Northwest Weaponry. This is Thomas, and today we are looking at one of my more recent acquisitions, Smith Corona model 1903 A3, sometimes called a Springfield 03 A3. This is an awesome piece. This is one that I've wanted for a while. Classic World War II American bolt action. Another one that I picked up for my friends at the war front. Good old 30-06. And yeah, it's one that I'd wanted for quite a while, and this one is in very nice shape. I believe this is a 1943 dated rifle. Awesome piece. Let's go ahead and go into the gun room and talk about the history of the model 1903. To talk about the 03A3, I'm going to have to go over a brief history of how it came to be, and as I say, we're going to keep this brief. Basically, the first 35 years of this gun's existence, we're going to gloss over in as few sentences as possible, as I would like to get a World War I model 1903 and go into this part at length in that video. But currently, all we have is the 03A3. So, in essence, during the Spanish-American War of 1898, it was realized that the Craig Jorgensen was an outdated design. This was largely because the Spaniards were using the model 1893 Mauser, of which we discussed a bit when we did the video on the Swedish Mauser model 1895. The Spanish Mauser was just a superior rifle. This is kind of the time when Mauser was coming back to the fore after Germany had kind of, recovered from the advent of smokeless powder cartridges. So the 1893 was out in force, and our soldiers were fighting against men carrying those. Also, the Gewehr 98 was now in production. And in about a 5-year period of time, Springfield had produced the model 1903 chambered in 3003 or 30-03. Few years later, 1906, they had rechambered it for 30-06. But this gun was a plain ripoff of the Mauser design with no royalties or permission paid or asked for. So the United States government settled out of court with Mauser for $200,000 to avoid a lawsuit and continued making the rifle. And now you officially have the model 1903 in mass production. By the time they switched to 30-06, they had actually already made about 200,000 rifles. Most, if not all, of these would be rechambered for 30-06. I've never seen or heard of an example personally that is still chambered in 30-03. That would probably fetch a pretty high price. But now you've got Springfield Armory making them, Rock Island is also making them, and they're going to continue manufacturing them through the First World War. At the end of the First World War, come 1919, Rock Island ceased production entirely. I don't believe they ever picked production back up either. Springfield themselves actually slowed down production significantly around 1927. They started making almost exclusively parts, mostly receivers and just replacement parts, contracting out other companies to make other parts, barrels and such. But then you've got World War II. Now, by this point, the M1 Garand had already been developed and adopted in 1936, but nowhere near enough of them were in service. So the 1903 design was dug back up. And at this point, you'll see the alterations show up. The biggest difference that you'll notice straight away is going to be the rear sight. This is when you would start seeing Smith Corona and Remington manufacturing rifles, is when the sight would be moved back on the receiver, as the earlier sight was up here. It was complicated to make. It was complicated to cut out the wood for it. Even the stocks on the 03A3 are a lot more simple. And this rear sight is really just kind of a better design. It's easy to use. You've got a fine blade front sight, and then this little dial peep sight on the back. And it's very handy. And this really is where the 03A3 in its true sense was born. Again, Remington and Smith Corona are going to be the companies that are going to be primarily making the full rifles. Springfield was still making receivers and did ramp up production significantly. They still were contracting out barrels and other parts. A number of cost-reducing measures were also taken, including a parkerized finish, a 2-groove barrel instead of a 4-groove barrel, though you may think that this might hinder accuracy, and in testing it really didn't. Also, machining was often considerably rougher on the 03A3 than the earlier Model 1903 designs, where machining was held to a very high standard. The parts of this rifle that are finely machined are basically the parts that need to be. Anything that doesn't need to be finely machined often isn't. And the parkerized finish is just cheaper and quicker to do. This was all done for expediency. Early in World War II, the Marines were pretty much exclusively using the 03A3 for infantry. And the Army, most units were also using the 03A3. And the Marines would continue using the 03A3 pretty late into the war, really. Production of the M1 Garand didn't really catch up until February 1944. So, late in the war. This rifle, actually, is a October of 1943 dated rifle. And we'll look at how you can tell the date on these when we get to the tabletop view. It's pretty simple. As you saw, I just checked the barrel and it's just printed right on the barrel. But cool little facts about that. I actually did look up what battles that would imply that this could have been in at the earliest. And in the Pacific, if that is where this rifle had been sent, the Battle of Tarawa, November 20th, 1943. And Battle of Macon Island, also November 20th, 1943. Or if it had gone to the European theater, it very likely would have been in the Allied invasion of Italy, and could have then served all the way through events such as D-Day, Omaha Beach. You know, this rifle could have been through a lot of the important later stages of the war, though you would not have seen this rifle at, for instance, something like the Battle of Guadalcanal. It's too late for that. But as I'd said, by late 1944, the M1 Garand production had finally met demand, and the 03A3 was pretty much phased out at this point. Remington had made about 707,600 rifles, and Smith Corona about 234,500 rifles. So they're not exactly uncommon, but they are fetching a higher price nowadays than they once did. Partially because of the fact that a significant amount of these were sporterized, as most of them are still circulated around the US, except for ones that were lost in battle, in which case the gun is probably destroyed at this point. But it's a really great gun. It's accurate. It's definitely got a lot of cool history behind it. This was the last purpose-built bolt-action battle rifle used by the United States. So that is pretty significant in the development of firearms. After purpose-built for the infantry, mind you. Stuff like sniper rifles would still often be bolt-action, up to this day, really. But it's definitely a milestone in American weapons doctrine, and this was the last of its kind, with a fairly long history of bolt-action rifles being used by the U.S., starting really with the Krag, and then the 1903, 1917, which almost replaced the 1903 altogether. It was made initially as a stopgap. Basically, it was a substitute standard rifle, and it was so liked in the First World War by soldiers and by higher-ups even, that it almost replaced the 1903 as the standard. But again, parts of that will be gone over a little bit more in depth when we actually talk about an early 1903, if and when the day comes. I would love to have that in hand. And I would love to see how the 03A3 compares to the 1903. As I said, the 1903 a lot of times is considered to be a more finely machined weapon, but the 03A3 was a little more practical. And really that about covers the history of this rifle. I guess at this point we'll go ahead and go to the tabletop and take a look at markings and bolt removal. Before we start looking at the finer details on this rifle, we ought to address the bayonet that has been present for the whole video so far, and we've just utterly neglected to mention. This is a 10-inch M1 bayonet, the same bayonet used on the M1 Garand, and this is what would have been issued with an 03A3. Model 1903 would be issued a similar bayonet, but 15 inches rather than 10 inches long. It's a cool piece. And yeah, I like having bayonets with my rifles as much as possible. This is both taken out of the scabbard and taken off of the rifle with that button you see right there. Now, not a lot of markings to look at here. All pretty straightforward. On the receiver, you've got your US stamp, then your maker stamp, Smith Corona in this case, model 03A3. Then on the barrel, see if you can get that in frame. Got a couple of stamps. So SC is just an abbreviation of Smith Corona. I believe it would just be an R for Remington and then an S for Springfield. But I could be incorrect on some of that. But SC is Smith Corona. Then Flaming Bomb. Then you've got month and year of manufacture. So 10 being October, then 1943. Mentioned that this is a very fine blade front sight here, kind of a shark fin style. And while we're looking at sights, may as well take a peek at the rear sight as well, because this is interesting. So to adjust for distance, I believe this is going to be measured in yards, and it runs from 200 to 800, and you just push with your finger. Very simple. And then you've got a windage adjustment on that dial there. Another feature, and this is something that we will be readdressing when we get to the final shooting segment, is the magazine cutoff switch. This was not something that was practical, nor was it really used for anything except for extraction of the bolts. So it's 3 positions. In this position, the magazine cutoff is not on. So the magazine is open. This position is going to be bolt extraction, and then this position is going to be magazine off. So for our purposes here, middle position, and then you can just pull the bolt straight out. Piece of cake. Again, that's the position you're going to pretty much want it to stay in. The ability to cut off the magazine, as I'd said, was really not something that was utilized nor particularly useful. It was kind of an outdated idea when it was implemented, and really there's not much of a reason that they should have kept it. Anyway, let's go ahead and take this guy out to the range and show you how to load it and put another 5 rounds through it. Loading the 03A3 is a piece of cake, pretty standard fare. As we discussed, this is kind of a Mauser ripoff, so you're going to load it like a Mauser. Stripper clip goes in the ramp, and just push them in with your thumb. You want to be kind of close to the base. Now, we're going to go ahead and close the bolt over these for this first little bit here to look at something here. So this magazine cutoff, we've talked about this a bit when it came to taking out the bolt. If you flip that off, you're now not traveling far enough back to pick bullets up out of the magazine, so you can single load. As we, again, already mentioned, this was kind of a controversial decision that nobody was really that into, but you can single load from there. So we're going to be firing the first 3 shots here, single loads, and then we'll open up the magazine for 5. And the safety right there. So safe, fire. Here we go. Just turned off the magazine cutoff, if you caught that. and the ramp does in fact stop the bolt from closing, so you have to depress the ramp to close the bolt. I love this piece. This is a smooth working gun. Once you get used to the sights, they're very pinpoint accurate, actually. Just takes a little bit of getting used to. But again, this is a piece, I'm really glad to have this in my collection. This is actually my first World War II American piece. We've probably already mentioned that, but it was definitely something that was a massive void in my collection. This gun will be popping up in the Versus circuit a lot, namely against guns like the Kar 98K, the Arisaka Type 99, which we haven't demoed yet, but that's coming soon. Might actually be the next demo that we do. Might do that, then the Kar 98K, because we haven't actually looked at either of those yet, though I think they've both been mentioned a couple times. But yeah, good old American 30-06, awesome rifle. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed the video. It's been Thomas with Great Northwest Weaponry, and I'll see you next time.